and increasing opportunities for the weak or marginalized in context of the pandemic. We are all aware of what happened in China and how what happened there in no time spread to nearly every country in the world. In nearly every country of the world today, governmental leaders are making efforts to address the spread of the pandemic. But it's really important for us to understand the role of social cohesion as we try to address the pandemic in terms of its spread, in terms of access to medication, vaccines. Now, what has happened tells us again that the world is just one simple community. The world is a system with parts. And if the system has to be stable, it must have all its parts functioning properly. It must have all its parts also stable, because the malfunctioning of one part of a system can have very destabilizing impact on the entire system. And so again, we see that a global pandemic has made us understand very deeply again that we are just one community. Though vast, the world is a simple community of people who should be concerned about each other's well-being. Now, to talk about the significance of social cohesion, let me quickly give a bird's eye view of what social cohesion means. The concept itself is or can be traced to a sociologist, Duncan, who wrote in the 19th century about the need for socially cohesive community of people concerned about each other's or one another's well-being. Now, as far back as 1897, Duncan had already theorized about the value, about the significance of social cohesion as a major feature of every progressive society. Every society where you find human beings dependent on each other. And of course, that's the nature of society. Society is characterized by interdependence, which is to say that no man is an island, which is also to say that we must depend on each other in order to become human beings, in order to live as human beings. As individuals, we must learn to acknowledge this fact that no man can live alone. It doesn't really matter how wealthy an individual is, he needs others to be able to live well. So, social cohesion has been developed as a concept in the past 2 decades by scholars, and policymakers have shown a lot of interest in it as a practical approach to building society and ensuring society is developing in the right direction without the cracks that could be detrimental to positive change in society. Now, it's difficult really to point to one simple definition of social cohesion. It's difficult to see scholars agreeing on a single definition for the concept. However, Bartleman Stiefenk, the German Bartleman Stiefenk, has developed a social cohesion radar to measure and monitor how countries are making progress with regards to social cohesion in policies, programs, and approach to governance. Really, this is not something that governmental leaders have done well, significantly well, in terms of embedding social cohesion principles in governance, in addressing social problems in society. It's not something that governmental leaders across the board have done significantly well. Now, the radar has three elements I'm going to talk about now. One, the extent of social relationships. The extent of social relationships. Two, citizens' level of connectedness. Three, focus of people on common good. Now, these are three elements on this radar, but I would like to say that because a lot of work is being done in this field of study in recent times, there are other elements we can talk about with regards to social cohesion. Because here, fundamentally, we're looking at the willingness, the readiness, the extent to which groups, individuals, peoples are willing to cooperate, to work together for the common good. So a socially cohesive world is necessary for addressing issues that affect everyone. And now let me say that pandemics have proven to be very impactful on the world without disaggregation, which is to say, pandemics usually have global impact. And this is not the first time we are seeing a pandemic in the world. In the Spanish pandemic that some of us may have read about, we talk about over 50 million people dying. Over 50 million people died from that pandemic across the world. So which is to say that there's a history, there's a precedence, even in the Asian pandemic and in the past pandemics, we have read about how the rich became the major victim. Now the rich became the major victim based on losses, economic losses. But again, we have to see how this pandemic is replicating inequality and the direction of that inequality. Now, talking about the significance of social cohesion, We have seen from last year, in course of the lockdowns, in course of some of the restrictions that governmental leaders took to address the spread, the social, economic, financial, public health implications have been huge. And we must see this even in terms of a post-pandemic era. We must continue to see this, see the impact of the pandemic from different dimensions. Already, studies are beginning to show that the pandemic has exposed the gaps in governance in many countries, gaps in governance, gaps in the responsiveness of governmental institutions to public health problems. From the perspective of Africa, for example, it's looking very clear now that if national and local governmental institutions fail to prepare for the unexpected, society, people would always see the outcome of pandemics, such as we have today, in terms of the pain, sufferings, inequality, insecurity that people face. In Africa, the period of the lockdown meant a whole lot for the economy of people, because many communities in Africa are agrarian in nature, and they survive on what they actually produce from the farms. In terms of selling, in terms of marketing, it became very difficult to move agricultural products from rural communities to townships, which became a big problem in terms of income for the local population. So that became a big problem because preservation of agricultural products in Africa is a problem. When you produce or harvest from your farm and you don't have a way of preserving it, you lose. And that was exactly what happened. Now, the impact on women has been huge, the lockdowns. Now, fortunately, so to say, Africa has not recorded the impact that many predicted, predicting that Africa was going to face a huge crisis because of pre-existing weak institutions of governance and lack of resources and failure to respond adequately to the crisis situation. That really has not happened the way we have seen with other regions of the world, other countries of the world, like the United States, some countries in Europe, and several other places where so much has happened in terms of deaths, in terms of pain, from the pandemic. So it is important to envision, to think about a socially cohesive approach, or to think about social cohesion, 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 to think about as an approach to addressing the pandemic. Again, this must be so because of the risk of inequality and its consequences. Now, we have seen a world that is so unequal at the global, national, and subnational levels, because it's a world that has been defined in recent times by neoliberalism, and citizens' access to resources in society has been mostly determined by the forces, the market forces, the forces of demand and supply. What the world is actually seeing is a growing level of inequality between the rich and the poor at the global, national, and subnational level. Now, the pandemic seems to have made things worse. The pandemic seems to have increased inequality at these levels, the national, global level, national, and subnational level. I think this is exactly what the pandemic is doing in terms of access to social amenities, access to health services, access to food, access to medicine, name it. There's a huge inequality that exists right now, which the pandemic is strengthening. And what that means is that when citizens become tired of these situations, they are likely to begin to respond in very dangerous ways to their leaders. So when citizens face economic pressure, so much that it becomes difficult for them to cope, they are very likely to resist the situation. And that means a whole lot for peace, means a whole lot for stability. So we must also see the danger in responding to the pandemic without social cohesion principles. Now, there are threats as well. Threats to security, threats to democracy. And of course, we have seen how the pandemic has pushed leaders to taking decisions unilaterally without considering the interest of citizens. Many leaders have shown tendencies for dictatorial leadership within this space of time, within this short time that they've had to respond to the pandemic in different countries. So we've seen a tendency for dictatorship. And we've also seen how citizens responded in some political spaces, civil society spaces, to the dictatorial tendencies of leaders, political leaders, governmental leaders, at the instance of the pandemic. So there are threats from different perspectives, conflict, conflict, and violent conflict for that matter, protest, from different countries, as a result of the pandemic, the way that governmental leaders have responded to the pandemic. Now, I want to talk about an aspect of social cohesion that is important for addressing the pandemic by governmental leaders, the implications of weak institutionalism. Now, let me remind us or take us to what happened in the United States under President Donald Trump. It's difficult to talk about a world with governmental leaders and citizens having a common vision regarding the pandemic based on the common good, based on the perception, on a perception of the common good. The African Union, the European Union, the United Nations, the World Health Organizations, and many more are multilateral platforms for addressing world problems. Now, they are important platforms for addressing world's problems. Now, under Donald Trump, given the role that the United States of America has played in recent times as a hegemon in quote, it was expected that America should play a leadership role when the pandemic broke. But I think the world was disappointed when Donald Trump started to undermine the potency of multilateral institutions to frontally address the pandemic. Donald Trump undermined the role of the World Health Organization and threatened to withdraw funding commitments to the World Health Organization. Now, that was the disposition, that was the atmosphere, which was really very disappointing, especially for the poor, especially for certain countries. So, in a world where you have the strong and the weak, where you have the poor and the rich, the hope of the rich can partly be in what multilateral institutions would do collectively to address a problem that affects everyone. By the way, the pandemic can affect anyone. What we have actually seen is that the rich and the poor are vulnerable to the pandemic. And so by trying to undermine multilateral institutions, it became very difficult to see how the poor could realize his or her hope through these institutions, the World Health Organization, that actually declared coronavirus a pandemic. So there are lessons that we must learn from the behavior of a country like the United States under Donald Trump. And maybe we should be happy that he's left office and we have Joe Biden, who is bringing up some level of impression that multilateral institutions matter in global problems. And he's already taken some steps in that direction, even with the issue of climate change. So we see and hope for a better role for the United States with this pandemic. Between southern countries and northern countries, we must acknowledge the ideological divide. We must acknowledge the pre-existing inequality when it comes to access to medicine, when it comes to technology, when it comes to wealth. For Africa, maybe it will be a long time for governmental leaders to realize that they have an important role to play in research, in the manufacturing of vaccines, in the discovery of solutions to public health problems. Maybe it will take a very long time. But I think we need to be very conscious of the entrenched inequality that is on a regular basis being strengthened by the behavior of centers of power in northern countries. And what I mean here is the power of neoliberalism, the power of the market, where the state is not expected to play a strong role when it comes to manufacturing. Now we have vaccines coming from northern countries. And we are aware of patent rights and what that means for the poor in the southern countries to access vaccines and what it really means. So if market principles are allowed to determine who gains access to vaccines, I can tell you that it will take a very long time for many African countries, or citizens in many African countries, to access vaccines. For a country like Nigeria with more than 200 million people, I guess it's going to be very long before everyone gains access to vaccines. Now, this is where we need to understand that this is a global problem, and that those who manufacture vaccines should see the social character of what they do. They should look at the social implications of a market-driven manufacturing of vaccines without consideration for inequality, consideration for a global health disaster. So my submission here is that we have a huge problem if vaccine manufacturing and distribution is insensitive to a key social cohesion principle such as inequality, the risk of inequality when it comes to access to vaccines. This is a huge problem, and I think the civil society, governmental leaders must begin to must begin to conceptualize this problem properly within the context of policy and advocacy. I think this is very important. Now, I want to talk about the implications of the response of governmental leaders to the pandemic without the element of social cohesion, to insecurity, to the effective tackling of the pandemic. Let me quickly say that for many countries in Africa, including my country, Nigeria, access to testing is a huge problem. Now, we are told that testing in certain public hospitals where there are testing facilities means a whole lot of money. Means a whole lot of money to part with. So if access to testing is this difficult, what is the guarantee that when the vaccines are available, that the ordinary citizen will have a chance to be vaccinated? And we are told of how some leaders, including Nigeria, have gone overseas and publicly displayed how they got vaccinated. Relatives of big politicians, of governmental leaders who have the privilege of traveling, going to Dubai and other places around the world to get vaccinated and publicly displaying how they got vaccination, to the public. For me, it's one of those things that speaks so badly about the behavior and attitude of leaders that don't show enough empathy and concern for citizens. So that does not promote social cohesion. It does not promote the approach to the pandemic that neglects citizens' feelings, citizens' socioeconomic situation or conditions, and the likelihood that citizens will even have opportunities to be tested and vaccinated. I mean, an attitude that tells a citizen, look, it's difficult for you to even imagine being vaccinated. It's really very dangerous for the psychology and the peace of communities. So I think there is a huge possibility that tension may rise when citizens begin to understand that their leaders have very little regard for their own well-being. And again, we've had a world, including the very rich countries, where access to public, to health services, access to health services is not an issue of human rights, even in the very rich countries. Access to health services has not been a matter of human rights. What the pandemic has exposed to us today is that we need to begin to conceptualize public health matters in terms of human rights. We need to begin to conceptualize public health issues, pandemics, in terms of human rights. Until we begin to do this, I think we will continue to have a situation where governmental leaders, especially in the developing world, in the southern countries, will not see the duty of seeing public health issues, crises like the pandemic, as human rights issues. They will begin to properly conceptualize public health issues as issues of human rights. Governmental leaders will continue in their attitude of neglecting their duties and commitments to citizens in the area of health. Now, there's an aspect that we must think about, reflect on. The regional response to the pandemic. And what I mean by regional response is regional political and economic groupings in the world, now, which seems to have been slow and weak in some countries, weak and slow in some countries. Now, the pandemic has exposed the connection or the interconnectedness of health, economic well-being, political well-being, and other social aspects of human life. So health matters for economic well-being, health matters for political well-being, and it does matter for every other aspect of the human life. Now, regional response to the pandemic has been weak in the sense that it has not responded adequately with this perception of the interconnectedness of health and other aspects of human life. Now, this has to be done because based on what experts are saying, we can't really tell when the next pandemic will break. Nobody knows when the next pandemic, and nobody knows when this pandemic will actually evaporate from the world. Well, experts are saying that we have to give close to 2 years. Scientists are saying that we have to give close to 2 years. That is a very long time. How can we, as a world, as governmental leaders, in our different political spaces, see this interconnectedness of health, economy, politics, and the rest of it? How can we see this interconnectedness in policy, our response to the pandemic? I would like to conclude by saying that social cohesion is a key element that must be embedded in policy at the global, national, and subnational level. The present situation where governmental leaders at the national level and subnational level in many countries, especially in Africa, have responded to the pandemic without due regard for social cohesion is dangerous and at best cannot be helpful for effective tackling of the pandemic at the level of treatment, at the level of vaccination. And even when it comes to administration of vaccine, if social cohesion is not given this deserved attention in policy, we are likely to see conflict, maybe very dangerous conflict between governmental leaders and citizens. Thank you for listening.
That was a good presentation, Prof. Thank you very much. So the floor is open now for anyone who have a question based on the presentation process Prof has given to us. If you have any contribution, any perspective, any approach you will want to share with us, or if you think there's something you want Prof to expatiate upon, please feel free and let us know. But ask him. The floor is open to all of us now.
Hi, Prof. Professor, I would just wanted to ask if you could elaborate on how we could tackle issues of, so you said, politicians going outside the nation and flaunting that they have been vaccinated. What do you think we could do to curb such behavior?
Okay. Should I respond to the questions that they come, or take all of them and then respond to all?
As you would like to do,
as you wish, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, let me say that first, civil society should begin to speak up, condemning the practice. Because if you build a narrative around this from the point of view of condemnation and immorality, maybe from the point of view of ethics and governance. So that is something that has to begin. The civil society must begin to build a narrative of condemnation around this practice. Because if every time there's a public health disaster, and those who have the means leave the country to other countries to take care of themselves, what happens to those who don't have the means to leave the country? Of course, this has been the practice in a country like Nigeria, where every politician would want to leave the country to Europe, to India, to the US for medical reasons. That has been the practice. But I think there was a problem during the lockdown when some people became sick and there was no easy way for them to leave the country to other countries for medical attention. I don't know if lessons were learned then, because it really means that you have to focus on developing the public health infrastructure in your country. Because you might have a time when it becomes very difficult for you to leave the country, even with your money, even with your resources. So I don't know if lessons were learned. Now the atmosphere is clear again, as some people are traveling. Some countries have opened the airports and the airspace for people to come in. So if a narrative of condemnation is not built around this, we will see more of it. Okay, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Prof, for your response to that question. I'm wondering, however, when you speak of civil societies building a narrative of condemnation around such behaviors from politicians and policymakers, I wonder then, in a place like Africa, where the vast majority of people have convinced themselves that COVID is a product of a white man's quote unquote virus and sickness, and that it's a black person is immune to that illness. The opposite is true, as we are seeing in Europe and the United States. We're seeing in the US, where we have huge population of blacks being affected by COVID. In Africa, then, where you have people with such mindsets, not everyone, but the vast majority, especially among the less privileged communities, who believe that this is a foreign illness. Don't you then think that politicians who take this vaccine openly, don't you think it is in the interest of the state and in the interest of the ordinary people to help direct their attention towards the reality that this indeed is an illness or epidemic that could kill anyone regardless of their race and color?
Well, it's possible to think in that direction, that politicians who openly take the vaccines and telling the world that this is what they've done may have some positive results in terms of giving Africans who currently believe that the virus does not exist, that opportunity to begin to get convinced that indeed the virus exists. But again, we have to interrogate the motive. We have to interrogate the intention, because if the intention is not that of galvanizing the African citizenry to understand that the virus is real, then we may just say that it should be having an unintended positive results if citizens begin to realize from those public display of the taken by politicians. But on the whole, I think that most politicians in Africa do not have the interests of citizens at heart. I think that it's very difficult to say that the majority of African leaders have their citizens at heart. So if such governmental leaders do anything that is not based on the interest they have on the well-being of citizens, I think it should be properly understood and put in context. That's my opinion, but I really agree with you that it could have very positive results, impact, effects on citizens.
Thank you, sir.
Doctor, you talk about social cohesion. I was wondering, what could we do on an individual level, as an individual? What can we do? Against the pandemic, that is.
I didn't get you. Maybe I should just take out a video for now.
Okay.
Yeah, let me take out a video for now.
No, Prof, you can keep your video on, Prof. We can hear you.
Yeah, we can.
Okay. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, Prof. Yes,
you can
Prof.
keep on your video because we can hear
Yes, Prof. I can hear you.
Okay, so can you take the question again?
Yes, Prof. My question was that, the talk was about social cohesion, right, as an approach to in response to the pandemic. I was saying, what can we do on an individual level in response to the pandemic? That's my question.
Okay, yeah, at individual levels, I, from a social cohesion perspective,
Right.
I think we have a duty to respond to each other concerning the pandemic with an attitude that inspires, an attitude that is inspiring, you know, in terms of what we need to do to protect ourselves. So, which means that I cannot, you know, behave in a way that suggests to you that the pandemic does not exist, and that if you do believe that the pandemic exists, I should not, you know, behave in a way that disdains or mocks or undermines your own good response to the pandemic by way of observing protocols that have been given to us. For instance, washing of hands, wearing of masks, you know, sanitizing your hands, and all of these things we are expected to do in public places, even here in Nigeria. I mean, wherever you go, you can't really go to a public place without this consciousness that you have to have your mask on. So you are socially cohesive in attitude if you understand that you have a responsibility to behave accordingly, you know, in the midst of people, to behave in a way that suggests that you are respectful of the law, and that you're observing, you know, the protocols. You're observing them. But again, you can only do little at individual levels if you have no authoritative tool, and that, I mean, if you're not in a position of authority, if you are not in government, if you don't have political power, you know, formal political power, if you don't have formal political power, it's difficult really to make the kind of impact that those who are in government would make. But again, if you operate within a collectivity, which is to say that if you belong to a group or if you are in the public space, then you have a chance to influence more people with a message that is embedded with social cohesion principles in terms of acknowledging the role of the risk associated, the risk and threats associated with the pandemic. So I don't know if I've been understood with my explanations.
Yes, Professor. I understood what you said. Thank you very
much. I also have a question, if I may, Professor.
Yeah, please turn on your camera, Johnny. Prof, kindly turn on your camera too. The line is okay now.
Actually, I can't, because I'm actually at work also at home. But I'm free and I wanted to join the meeting. So if it's not very
rude, go ahead.
Yeah, my question is, how do we approach the people that come up with the argument whereby they say, okay, if people that are vaccinated should not be afraid of those who choose not to to take the vaccine, as long as they will be immune. So it's their own choice if they're putting their own health in danger, because those who take the vaccine in theory should be immune. How do we approach this issue? What do we say?
Yeah, you see, the social dimension to this issues to the issue of vaccine is huge. Now we may begin to have a new culture, a new culture based on fears, based on fears. So those who have been vaccinated are afraid of those who have not been vaccinated, and if this is allowed to fester, we will see it, manifested in policies, countries coming up, bringing up policies that will further expand inequality and discrimination, because a new culture, the risk of a new culture, the risk of a pandemic-based culture of discrimination, passionate discrimination reflected in policy will divide the world further, because, and this is a dangerous trend, but I think that in vaccine administration and the political economy of vaccine administration, we must be very conscious of the risk of a new culture manifesting through behavior and policy that has the potency to strengthen pre-existing discrimination. When that begins to happen, we can't be talking about a world that is moving away, that is moving in the direction of socially cohesive policies and programs at a global, national, and subnational level. And that's a dangerous trend. So that means that it gets to a time when you arrive in a country's airport and you must, in your passport, demonstrate that you have taken a vaccine. And if not, you're likely to be turned back. You're likely to be treated very badly. And when that begins to happen, we can't be talking about social cohesion. So we must be mindful. We must be mindful of the risk of a new culture. And I really agree with you. And this is what I have to say, because it should be a concern. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Prof, you talked about people, you talked about a new culture and the possibility of people being denied entry into certain countries on the basis of not having taken the vaccine. We do know that there are some population, a very small population around the world who have had vaccines in the past, especially children, and been badly affected by it. And in some countries, such persons, whether they are still children or adults, were given a certificate of exception that they will not be allowed to take vaccine anymore. In other countries, such health facilities and their testing maybe are not available, or the infrastructures are not good enough, so certificates were not issued to such people. Now, this category of people, if they are to travel to an X country and they are denied entry, where then does the issue of vaccination as a concern for public health and human rights, where then do the both of them, how can we separate these two in such a case?
Well, I think this question helps to reinforce my thinking and my response to the previous question. Now, if children have been given vaccines and been given certificates to show that they've already been vaccinated, and those without vaccines visiting another country are denied entry. If I got your question well.
Yeah, sorry, Prof. Let me clarify my question. I didn't clarify it well. So some countries, some people in some countries took vaccine and were badly affected by it. Perhaps they had to take vaccine twice, and maybe after the first one, they were badly affected. Or after they took both vaccines, they were badly affected, hospitalized, nearly died. Then their parents went on to take, maybe put them through the immunity test to see, or the allergic test to see what was good for them, what wasn't good for them, what causes this, and it was traced back to the vaccine. And on the basis of that, such persons were given a certificate not to take vaccine again in the future should there be epidemic or any other disease around the world. Haven't had their life threatened by vaccine. What happened to such people if they are to travel to a country X, Y, Z, that would deny them entry? How then do we, where do we maintain the legality on public health safety and human rights?
Thank you very much. I think this is very clear to me now. This is why I think that vaccine administration at the moment, the science of vaccine production is not completely successful. It's not completely successful. I think that for such persons that are allergic to vaccines against the pandemic, the world must acknowledge the merit. The world policies, governments must acknowledge the merit of excuse from being vaccinated in the future. We must acknowledge the merit of being excused. It's a human right. It's a right that must be recognized. You know, so if a legal perspective is brought on by countries who may likely want to develop the new culture I talked about by formulating policies that compel people to show that they've been vaccinated before landing in the country. This set of persons who are allergic to the pandemic should have a place in the law. And of course, I'm not expecting such laws. But if they do happen, such laws must acknowledge the fact that such children who cannot take vaccines against any pandemic should leave. Because by compelling them to take vaccine because the law says so, you will already, or such countries will already be spelling death for these children. So I think that it's a complex, very complex thing, and it also means that the human physiology is different in some ways when it comes to relating with external elements like vaccines and drugs and the rest of it. So every individual is unique in some way and would respond differently, you know, to drugs and vaccines, and this must have a place in the law. That's my opinion. Hello? Hello?
Charles is on mute. Unmute yourself.
Hey, yes.
Okay.
I can hear you now.
Yes.
Oh yeah. I say, is there any other person who have a question?
Nothing from my side.
Okay. If there's no more question, darling, we want to thank you so much for being with us today at the Center for Peace and Violence Preventions. Your talk really gave us a lot to reflect upon. We've learned a lot, and hopefully we as individuals, we hope to implement our own path in showing that the right tools of social cohesion are abided by and they're enhanced and promoted. And we hope that state and policymakers as well will take into consideration some of the things that we've discussed today to ensure that we together as community of nations and people can address this epidemic together and come out of it stronger, and also have policies that will be put in place for years and years to come. We also look forward to further collaboration with you and your university and your center. It was a distinct privilege to have you here, and we look forward again to having you as a guest speaker. Once again, Professor Allen, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
The rest of you, thank you for participating in this online webinar. We hope that you join us next month for our next talk. We will be speaking with Peter. Peter will be talking to us on the importance of diversity. He's from Australia, and hopefully he'll be speaking to us at the end of next month. Thank you once again, and have a great time from Australia, Africa, Mali, Nigeria, here in Romania. Those of you participated, thank you so much. From Germany, we thank all of you for being a part of this. Have a great time. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you. Ciao.
Thank you.